Oi, oi, it's your boy, the Charles III of opinions that must be heard, Jack Slack. It's the Jack Slack podcast, and we're coming at you following a fairly large week of fights. I watched a lot of fights this weekend. Didn't get one out last week because I was on the road. Normally I take my stuff on the road with me. Could not do that this time. Took a USB mic thinking, shit quality audio will be alright. And then I got to the other end and realised that my new laptop doesn't have a traditional USB port. So rather than hunt around the town I was in for a USB to USB-C converter, I was like, I'll do it next week. But that's why you got me today on the most important bank holiday in my lifetime. New king, new me. Old Charles III, C3, Triple C, the real Triple C. But, it's actually weird. We had the two short kings in action this weekend. We had Henry Cejudo fighting for the bantamweight title in the UFC after a 3-year layoff. And we had Demetrius Johnson fighting what could be his last MMA fight in one championship, completing his trilogy with Adriano Moraes. And I think the consensus among most people, or most people in the fight sphere, seems to be that one had the better event this weekend. I think I've had a very interesting weekend because I went out of my way to find and watch Ryzen, the Ryzen 42 card and the Ryzen Landmark 5 card. And I would say that Ryzen and One both put on good cards this weekend, but they're almost polar opposites because you have to go significantly out of your way to find Ryzen if you're anywhere but Japan, basically. And you might not even hear it's on, to be honest. But One, by being so easily available on YouTube. I mean, I think this one was on Prime for Americans, but it was on YouTube for me. Just having the availability there, I think is going to help them win out in the end. You know, I don't think they'll ever be profitable, but as long as Amazon's backing them, they don't need to be. And the number of people who were talking about One in a positive way in comparison to the UFC this weekend was very interesting. And I'm saying that across multiple mediums, not just Reddit, where there are a huge amount of paid One employees just being absolute freaks. This dude getting on me about Stamp Fairtex because I said her dancing around a bit on the catwalk before getting in the cage is not Genki Sudo level entrance. I mean, Yaman had, which is a real name of a real fighter, all caps, YA-MAN, Yaman. Gonna call this episode Your Boy on Your Man. But he had a better entrance at Ryzen. And he wasn't even their big main event act. He had a full dance troupe and all sorts of shit. So if you like big entrances, there's genuinely impressive stuff out there. And I was talking about the time that Genki Sudo, his biggest entrance was before his last match. And he retired with no one really knowing that he was going to retire before the match. He had a full dance troupe. He had this amazing Native American headdress. He did a full dance number with the dance troupe that he'd choreographed because he went on to be in World Order. Is it World Order? The pop group? You will have seen them in the GIFs of dudes in suits dancing. But he did this full 5-minute entrance number, gets in the ring, submits to Massio Page, who was pretty decent and ended up in WEC and I think maybe even the UFC after that. Submits him in under 3 minutes with, I believe, a leaping triangle, but maybe just a triangle from the bottom. Because that's what Genki Sudo did, triangle choke motherfuckers. And then he retired. And that's showmanship. That's big. And I said, yeah, I've seen that. I'm not really that fussed about Stamp Fairtex doing a TikTok dance. And some nerd got on Reddit and was like, Jack Slack's so miserable. He says that because Stamp does TikTok dances, she's bad. And it's like, no, I didn't say she was bad. I used to rag on the people she was fighting that were fucking terrible. That Indian lass who caught a kick and did an inside trip that put Stamp Fairtex on her back, and then Stamp Fairtex choked her, and people were like, oh my god, Stamp's got jits now. But no, Stamp Fairtex in her not her last one, a couple of fights ago, she fought Angela Lee, and Angela Lee was fucking massive compared to her. And Angela Lee got the finish, I think, in the second round, but Stamp gave a great account of herself, and she's fighting in 2 sports at the same time for one. She's really keeping the lights on there, her and Rod Tang. But anytime One comes up on Reddit now, it's just a load of dudes who write full copy that's been written for them to post. And it takes the sheen off. I might have to talk to my good friend Chatri Sichodong and have him tone it down a bit. But yes, one was good. So what I'm going to do today, because I've watched so much fucking fighting this weekend, I'm going to do the stuff that jumps out at me today, and then I'll be back on the Boycast to talk about everything else. And, of course, everything that's coming up this weekend. I haven't watched Canelo's fight yet. We'll talk about that on the Boycast as well. But UFC 288, Rising 42, a bit of Rising Landmark 5, and one, Fight Night 10. Very confusing that they have one fight night and one Friday night fights. But the important thing is that they named it One Fight Night 10, Johnson versus Moraes III. If you remember a couple of years ago, I think even until like last year, one was still calling their events One Magnitude or One Endurance or One Return of the Warriors. It was just, you're going, no one has any idea how many events there's been, which isn't really necessary, but no one has any idea who's fighting. No one has any idea what's going on. But this one main event, Johnson versus Moraes III, and the UFC main event, Cejudo versus Aljamain Sterling, had some commonalities in. It was a big weekend for the clinch, even in the Rising main event, actually. Big clinch weekend. But two sort of different takes on it. And Demetrius Johnson, one of the things that he's wonderful at, he's very good at a lot of things. The things that really stand out to me, because not many people are good at them in MMA, are guard passing, pursuing submissions from top side control, and actually using strikes in the clinch effectively. It's forever the bane of people who've watched some good Muay Thai. It bugs them that there's not enough kneeing and elbowing going on in the clinches. And it's sort of been quite stagnant for a while because guys don't want to give up. Like when you're in a clinch, particularly the 50-50 clinch, the over-under, whatever you want to call it, where you have one underhook and one overhook. You see it 1,000 times in every fight because it is such an easy position to fall into, and and when you're in a worse position, you try and fight back to it. It's almost identical to the classical tie-up of boxing. But because everyone's trying to pummel to that position to make life better, or pummel the double underhooks so that they have the choice of attacking or, if you have double underhooks, it's a lot easier to post your head and escape your arms and just slip away from someone. But you want control, so you're always pummeling for control. And throwing strikes in the middle of that gives people openings. Like even in this Cejudo Aljamain Sterling one, I think it was round 4, round 3. It was later on in the fight, but Cejudo gets Aljamain to the fence. He attempts to take down. He get from I believe double underhooks, and he doesn't get it. Aljamain spreads his feet, stays stable, and Cejudo releases his grip on the body lock to throw a couple of punches to the head. And the moment he does, Aljamain Sterling underhooks that side, or he posts on the bicep and then underhooks that side. But like in the course of striking, you give up position sometimes. It just happens. And if you're not comfortable giving up position, it can be very bad. It can limit what you're willing to do. Demetrius Johnson, and in this fight you saw it especially, but even in all his UFC fights, he will strike freely from the clinch because typically he can fight back from slightly disadvantageous positions, and then he doesn't really take risks giving up really bad positions, And a lot of that is just practice. He knows when he's in trouble and when he isn't. But if you watch this fight with Moraes, the third one, most of the fight, Moraes is pursuing this pinch headlock along the cage. And a pinch headlock is if you get the underhook under the opponent's armpit, and then you have the other arm over their shoulder, you lock your hands together, and you pull it back so that the arm that's over, not the arm that's in the underhook, your elbow comes down in front of their chest. So it's a headlock, but you're lifting the underhook side rather than wrapping the head in the way that ends up in like a bad head and arm throw. If you want a really good example of the pinch headlock, go watch... actually, you might not even be able to find the fight, but you can find clips of it, probably on Reddit. Just Google Ben Askren pinch headlock, because there's a clip of him doing it to Koreshkov, where he pinch headlocks him, he steps in the middle to throw him onto his hands, and Koreshkov puts his hands down, so Ben Askren grabs the front headlock, and he pulls his arms up right behind him in basically like a pedigree, or a stockade, as it's called in catch wrestling, and folds him over. His shoulders are just getting popped out of their sockets. But Moraes was working on this pinch headlock, and there's stuff you can do from a pinch headlock. There's a guy called Owen Livesey, who's doing really well on the no-gi scene at the moment. He's a Welsh, I believe. Oh no, he might be from Northern England. Can't remember, but he's a judoka, and he does a lot of good foot sweeps and throws off a pinch headlock. And you'll also see the pinch headlock in Muay Thai, because if you can jack that underhook up and lock your hands and lock your elbow in front of their body, you can hammer in knees. You can post your head on them and hammer in knees from there. It's a really powerful kneeing position. So Moraes was getting it a lot, and Johnson wasn't that bothered. So if you watch the fight, there's lots of moments along the fence where Johnson doesn't have the whizzer because his arm's being lifted up. And you see it all the time in women's MMA. People got mad at me for ragging on women's MMA this week, but literally, you see this position all the time in women's MMA, and the lass who's getting her arm jacked up will grab over the head and attempt a hip throw or a head and arm throw, or whatever you want to call it, fall on the headlock basically and give up their back on the floor, or it just turns into an ugly scramble. And Johnson's staying up. He's using his other hand to post in the hip and move his hips back. He's landing knees from what looks like a disadvantageous position. And then by creating the movement and having Moraes move around the cage with him rather than being flat to the fence, he's able to get his hand underneath the elbow that's in front of his chest, pick it up and grab the underhook, and then turn Moraes onto the fence. The big thing, if you're watching this fight, that pinch headlock, the elbow in front of the chest, or the non-underhooking arm in front of the chest, is a big part of it. And Johnson just keeps pulling it up and going in under it for his own underhook and turning Moraes onto the fence. But his knees from the clinch have always been lovely. His elbows from the clinch have always been lovely. It's easy to get distracted by the moments against, I think it was John Dodson in the first fight, where he climbed up him and started throwing the on back elbows while his back was to the fence and he was climbing up on the guy. Very rare to see someone do that, which is why it was so impressive. But it didn't do a lot. What does a lot for Demetrious Johnson is between or while he's moving and creating motion in these clinches, he's hammering in knees. And he's, one, accurate, and two, got really good mechanics. If you watch his knees, they curve beautifully when they're coming in from the side. The angle changes depending on where he can get his opponent's elbows to, and he sneaks them in and he hits them right in the floating rib or the solar plexus, and it messes people up. And Moraes was gassed by like round 2 of this fight. Now, stock has fallen on Moraes a lot since that first Demetrious Johnson fight. I think I was impressed by how he kept the distance in the first round of the first fight, and Johnson was very ineffective in that first round. And then I think it was, did it go 2 rounds or did it end in 1 round? I can't remember. But later in the fight, later in what happened in that fight, he got the takedown. Johnson tried to get up on his hand, and Moraes hit him with a knee, knocked him out. Something Moraes had already done to some Japanese lad he fought, can't remember his name. But he timed his people getting up very well. The thing was that he was keeping Johnson out at extreme distance in the first fight. And I don't know if that was his footwork or if that was Johnson just being a little bit thrown off by how tall this guy is. Because if you watch the second fight and the third fight, and also any other Moraes fight, he doesn't throw combinations. He doesn't set things up very well. It's sort of one at a time. And he fights like he's terrified of gassing. Certainly he strikes like he's terrified of gassing. And in this fight, it was even worse because it was in Denver and he gassed his arse off in 2 rounds. And Johnson, obviously always in shape, didn't even look that tired at the end of the fight, to be honest. In fact, I was pretty impressed all round with how people looked. I mean, there was a lot of earlier finishes on this card, but generally people looked pretty conditioned given that it was in Denver. And I am the biggest hater of fights at I know it's not altitude, it's elevation, at fights that are high up and make people tired faster. So I think this fight was more important for what it signified for Demetrious Johnson, and we're always looking to add to Demetrious Johnson's legacy. It's agreed, and I'm saying this, I agree completely. Demetrious Johnson, one of the greatest fighters of all time, didn't really get a fair shake of it in the UFC. They had trouble promoting him, which to me is the job of the promoter. I kind of have no sympathy when they say that like Francis Ngannou wasn't a draw or something like that. Has there ever been anyone who's more perfect to draw eyes to fighting than the guy knocking people out in 1 round who walked across a desert to make his dreams come true? Has there ever been someone more marketable than the flyweight who decimates everyone he fights, everywhere he fights them? And it wasn't like he wasn't finishing either. He was finishing people with arm bars. He was finishing people with, he knocked out Joey B, armbarred Kyoji, armbarred Moraga. Not even the classic get on the back and rear naked choke. He's finishing people with a submission that honestly doesn't happen that much in MMA. with the exception of a couple of specialists like obviously Ronda Rousey, Sakuraba. Most of his finishes were by armbar. But yeah, had a rough go of it in the UFC. We're all agreed that he is one of the greats. So people were always looking for this. And of course, the first fight with Moraes. So for this to be correct, they were both one knockout apiece. They had to do a third. This is the book closing on that. This is the closure. Actually, there were a couple of flying knees from the clinch where Demetrius Johnson got some serious airtime. Very cool. Something that Juan Archuleta does, but Juan Archuleta manages to not hit people with them. But Demetrius Johnson hit Moraes in the face with a flying knee going backwards from the clinch. And it would have been beautiful, someone said, if that ended the fight, because then you'd have a knee knockout in number 1, knee knockout in number 2, and a knee knockout in number 3, all from different positions, all different things going on. And we'd call it like the knee trilogy or something. But knees played a crucial role in this fight because they were part of how Demetrius Johnson was tiring him out. But it was sort of a fight where Johnson never got to dominate like he did throughout his entire flyweight run. He never really got to style on Moraes from the top. The fourth and fifth round, he did get to open up with strikes. Someone made a really nice graph of the strikes landed over time, and just by round 4 is like, oh, there they go. But that was more to do with Moraes just not giving anything back. I think this trilogy has confirmed really more that Moraes wasn't that guy. He just is gigantic and had I'm not saying he did badly in the first fight. I thought he did what he should have, but he never really improved. And Demetrius Johnson is always improving. And even if he's like old now, and old as fighters go, and certainly flyweights go, he's still looking at his past fights and going, what can I do better? What do I fix? Whereas Moraes fought this fight like he fought the second fight and the first fight. If anything, a bit more hesitantly. But, he got knocked out in the last one, so reason to be hesitant. Would I like to see Demetrius Johnson come back and fight Brandon Moreno? Yeah, that would be fun. But right now, he's propping up his friend's organisation. we always talk about the conflict of interest on this show because Matt Hume is DJ's coach and manager and has always been. They're very, very close. And then when DJ came to one where Matt Hume is, everyone's a vice president in one, but Matt Hume's on the board, he's on the technical committee, he found and trained the judges and referees, he sits ringside ruling on things, and he sits next to Chatri, the two of them together. And Demetrius Johnson goes, he's not in my corner anymore because that would be a conflict of interest, which, is true, but I think it's still a conflict of interest if the guy's sat next to Chatri, running the show. But they're fighting, and Rich Franklin, another Matt Hume guy, is on commentary. God knows why. And he points out that Demetrius Johnson's talking to Matt Hume and Chatri, like through the cage while he's hammer fisting Moraes as Moraes drops on a terrible shot. Another thing about Moraes, just where are these takedowns, mate? What are they? But yes, one short king picks up a victory, seals the deal. And he made noises that he was going to retire or do like special fights and things. And Mikey Musumeci said he'd love to grapple him. But then they brought in the guy who won earlier on the card to do like a stare down in the cage. It's like, don't do that if the guy's making the retirement noises, especially if no one knows who that other guy is. But that was the top end of the one card. The rest of the one card, basically what one does, a festival of combat sports. I say it every time, but they're becoming the UFC's biggest competitor in MMA without many MMA fighters. They have a couple of MMA fights on each card. They have, 10 to 20 really good MMA fighters under their banner. The UFC has a 600-fighter roster. Bellator has probably 10% of the good fighters in the world, the really good MMA fighters. And one are still doing better with what they've got because they said, we don't have enough good MMA fighters. Let's do some kickboxing. Let's do some 4-ounce Muay Thai. And they really hit on goal. I mean, they've just added grappling as well, like 2 years ago. Let's do some grappling. And it's working really well for them. So, in terms of MMA fights on this card, you got Demetrius Johnson and Adriano Moraes. Good matchup. You got Sebastian Kadistan versus Roberto Soldic. Good matchup. And then you got a Sage Northcutt fight, an Ong Lashong fight. And that's about it. Ok Rayun opening the card despite being the champion 2 fights ago. Not an awful lot to get excited about. But when you sprinkle in Rod Tang, 4-ounce Muay Thai in the co-main event, Mikey Musumeci grappling, Oh, sorry, there was the Stan Fairtex MMA fight, but they got the Tairu Atolo Renia Derrida grappling match, which turned out shite, but it is exciting to have on there. It's that variety. I always think of one like the scene in Enter the Dragon where they go to Han's Island, and he's got a feast going on with people doing the standing punches in gis outside, armies of guys training some karate or something, and then inside there's a sumo match going on while dinner's being served, and it's just, just lots of stuff going on, and it's great. I know he's the bad guy, but I thought it was dope. But Rodtang co-main event, really interesting. This guy, Edgar Juarez Tabarez, kept throwing left kicks. Rodtang would catch the left kick on his right forearm, scoop it with his left hand, pull it down, and leap in with a left hook to the body. And you're watching that going, that's a really good punch. I mean, he hurt Haggerty with it in the first fight, and then he finished him off it, basically, in the second fight. But it's a big time for your head to be open while you're lunging towards the guy. So there's always the danger of a counter elbow or even a good counter punch catching you in 4-ounce gloves. And then he did it again, and Tabarez span for a back elbow, and Rodtang just put his forearm up, stopped it at the tricep, and as Tabarez was turning back towards him, he hit him with a left elbow of his own. The sequence is gorgeous. It's like a Jackie Chan movie where you're going, you're blocking things that you couldn't possibly see coming, and you're both throwing punches and blocking. Really cool. Check it out. There's still a lot of contention around Rodtang in Muay Thai circles because he doesn't want to fight Superlek. They booked it previously, and then he was like, "Oh, I can't. It's cancelled." And that was about 3 weeks ago. So he definitely can, but he seems to prefer fighting foreigners or Farang. But then the people who say that 4-ounce Muay Thai is a crapshoot, and you could get knocked out at any time just based on luck, and it actually removes all skill. And Rodtang has been fighting 4-ounce Muay Thai every 2 weeks for 4 or 5 years at this point, and never been knocked out. So it's one or the other. It can't be that 4-ounce Muay Thai is the most dangerous thing in the world, and he's doing it every week, and it removes all the skill from other top ties, or he's scared of top ties because all their skill will undermine his 4-ounce Muay Thai. Mikey Musumeci versus Osama Almawai. This was good, because Almawai was actually IBJJF Nogi champ, I believe, last year, which makes him significantly better as a grappler, and certainly more current as a grappler than Mikey Musumeci's last two opponents. Mikey Musumeci, in his last one, took on a Sambist named Bayan Duran Gantumer and tore his knee into pieces. The guy refused to tap to a heel hook, and Mikey just kept putting it on again and again. And obviously at the time, because the commentators were so confused, they're like, this guy has crazy knee tendon flexibility. Came out afterwards, all the tendons in his knees, ACL, MCL, whatever the other CLs were, all his CLs were fucked. And his ankle was broken. It's like, what do you get out of that? People were going on about Budo or Bushido, and you're going, he's Mongolian. And he competes in Sambo, a Russian martial arts. So what the fuck does that have to do with anything? And all he got out of it was whatever small amount they offered him to take the match. And he probably won't be healed up to compete and defend his Sambo world title next time there's a Sambo World Cup. Really stupid behavior. But yeah, it was like Mikey Musumeci versus Sambist, who doesn't know anything about heel hooks. Not interesting. Except for the freaky highlight of him breaking this guy's knee. Mikey versus Masakatsu Imanari, never a super elite grappling grappler, and older than the hills. But Mikey versus current World IBJJF Nogi champion, very fun. And what I really enjoyed about this was Mikey's foot pummeling from leg entanglements. He put out an instructional on it, which is one of my low-key bangers. It came and went with like no pomp and circumstance. No one hyped it, and I think it's amazing. It's one of the ones I revisit the most on my BJJ Fanatics. And I was watching it going like, this could be where the leg lock meta goes. Because Mikey comes from a background in the gi where he does lots of berimbolos and things and gets on people's backs from the double guard pull position. No double guard pull in no-gi grappling, but if you're on a leg, you are basically in a double guard pull. Or if the opponent's on a leg. So yeah, this leg pummeling stuff's really interesting. It's him like disengaging from the saddle as the opponent defends and coming up on passes or going to their back. And Cole Abate, who trained with him a bit and apparently admires him, but he did the same thing in his match with Damian Anderson a couple of weeks ago. And I said to myself, damn, yeah, it's going to catch on. But if you watch Mikey in this match, he's on one leg, the guy's defending, and Mikey's on the other leg. The way that he switches from one leg to the other, really impressive. And the way that he switches from having his feet in and around the guy's knee, his legs wrapped around the guy's knee, to having his feet in on the guy's stomach and keeping him away so that he can switch to the other leg, really impressive. Way too much going on to break down in an audio podcast, but I do recommend watching that match. He eventually gives up on the legs because Aljo, if you've won a world title in no-gi in the last couple of years, you know about leg locks. So the guy defended himself really well, and Mikey came up on top, passed, threatened a Darce choke, got on his back, rear naked choked him, got the submission 8 minutes in. But I just love that they're giving us... Because Mikey Musumeci is too small for ADCC. The ADCC lowest weight class is 66 kilos. The guy he met here won the IBJJF Worlds at 55. For people like Mikey Musumeci, Bruno Malfacine, Caio Terra, all technical savants, brilliant grapplers, but there is no place for them at ADCC currently. I'd like them to add the weight class below and let these guys go. But if you watch Jeff Glover turn up in, I think it was 2017 ADCC, he takes on Gio Martinez and he's dwarfed by him. And Gio Martinez is a small guy in the smallest division at ADCC. So giving Mikey Musumeci a platform and showing him off. Really good, to be honest. Then I think I should jump over to the UFC at some point, but Kazakhstan versus Soldic was a banger. Soldic, I was doing stuff on a few years ago. I did a Filthy Casual's Guide to His Style. You can find it on the YouTube channel. Wears his Crow Cop influence on his sleeve. He's all high kicks and left straights. He's a southpaw in the Crow Cop mould. Throw the left straight fast and hard. Throw the left high kick fast and hard. Sneak in the odd left body kick when you can. He's been knocking out dudes for years. His one debut came and went with little aplomb because it was no contest. But also I didn't hear much about it before it even happened. But he fought Kazakhstan, gave him hell with left straight in the first round. But Kazakhstan, low-key becoming my boy, gave Ben Askren his easiest win of all time. Ben Askren just manhandled this dude with no trouble. But when he is on, or rather when things are going his way, actually not even then, when he's hitting people, it's fun. His most recent win before this was that incredible fight with Yuri Lepicus, where it went under a minute, but he backed Lepicus up to the fence, got him to level change right onto an uppercut. It was the biggest uppercut knockout I've seen in years. But he was on a 3-fight losing streak in one, and it looked like he was on the way out the door, and then he's now suddenly on a 3-fight winning streak, all knockouts. But Soldic, he had horrible trouble with Soldic in the first round, but in the second round he just times him perfectly. Soldic, every time he steps in and throws his left hand, his head comes forward, and he often drops his right hand to do it. So Kazakhstan just popped his left elbow out there in front of him, and Soldic went straight onto it, knocked himself out. Really lovely. And especially to do that on someone so fast. Soldic was the better striker, it appeared, but he was also the faster striker. So for Kazakhstan to see that opening, find it against a guy who's just blasting him with speed, very impressive. Right, we'll do the rest of the one on the Boycast. We're hopping over to UFC 288. Aljamain Sterling versus Henry Cejudo. I thought this was... People didn't really enjoy this. It wasn't a huge action fight, but I enjoyed it. I thought it was a good technical fight. There's this frustration with Aljamain Sterling, which is his, people say abuse of, but his use of the rules that prohibit knees to the head of a downed opponent. He spends a lot of time on his hands and knees in front of people. Sucking dick. No, he spends a lot of time on his hands and knees in front of people, and they can't knee him in the head, which means that they've got limited options, and he can sort of use that to spam takedowns and fail takedowns without actually getting much comeuppance. With that being said, everyone else in the UFC still suffering comeuppance when they fail on takedowns like this. So there is a skill to it, certainly. You agree to fight under a rule set, and you try and play that rule set to the best of your ability. Floyd Mayweather fights in a side-on stance, a Philly shell, whatever you want to call it, but because the whole backside of his body is illegal to hit, and the thing facing you is his shoulder and arm, really cuts down what you can legally do against him. Is that cowardice? Is that being a bitch playing the rules? Not my place to say. But personally, I believe anything short of MMA Letway is being a cowardly bitch. It's one of those things. If they changed the rules overnight, maybe he'd have a bad habit left over. Maybe he'd get himself caught if he was in a 5-round fight. 5th round, he does something stupid and he does this again and gets kneed in the head. But probably what would happen is he'd just change how he fights. He'd just nip that bit out of his game. Or keep his hands on the opponent's thighs, to stop them from kneeing him in the head. I think the bigger aspect here in this fight was how Henry Cejudo didn't really have anything to punish Aljamain Sterling for getting stuck in the front headlock. The front headlock in wrestling, short of, ollie rolls and cement mixers and the cow catcher, which is a very powerful way to turn someone over, but mostly is about go-behinds. You're looking to run around to their back or run around to their back and grab their hamstring and go on a single. It's your chance to take their failed shot and turn it into something of your own. In grappling, you have to create that dilemma because, what you saw here in this fight a lot was Henry Cejudo would get the front headlock, whether he sprawled on a shot or put Aljamain Sterling into the front headlock, which there were a couple of really nice entries to that, which we'll talk about in a minute, but he'd get the front headlock, and then the thing that stopped him from running around to the side was that Aljamain Sterling would just throw an arm around him. If you go full scarecrow and just throw your arms out to the sides when you're in a front headlock, the guy can't go through your arms. He has to try and get rid of your arms. You can hit arm drags and you can step over the arm and so on, but if you grab a hold of a single and you don't let go of it, or you just keep your arm blocking them from running around to your side, not a lot you can do, so you have to do something different. Now in grappling, in Pride, maybe that's knees to the head. In grappling and MMA without knees to the head, you got to threaten chokes. And this is the dilemma that you'll see the Danaher squad using. You can watch Gordon Ryan do this right now. You can go watch Gordon Ryan do it about 10 times to Philip Rowe in their match, in their Iron Man grappling match. But when Gordon Ryan gets on the front headlock, he often brings his knees in so that the guy reaches out for his legs to stop him running to the back, and then he chokes them. Or if they keep tight, he runs around to their back. And Tony Ferguson did this in MMA. You can see in his fights with Gleison Tebow, other people. When he sprawls on someone, or he snaps them down and sprawls out into the front headlock, he looks to run behind them, he looks for the choke, he looks to run behind them. Because they have to play that dilemma of bringing their elbows in and defending their neck with their hands, or bringing their arms out and defending their back by not letting you run round. Aljamain Sterling just had his arms out the whole time. He didn't really care about Cejudo threatening a choke. And he's very experienced, so when Cejudo kept his hands locked in the front headlock most of the time, as opposed to keeping the chin strap grip. And when Cejudo did start looking for a chin strap grip, he opened his hands and started to do it, and Aljamain Sterling immediately grabbed the wrist, pushed it away, started getting up. It's like striking from the clinch. When you start moving, you give the guy openings. But if you just hold on, what are you really accomplishing? Now, Cejudo is at a degree of disadvantage with the front headlock stuff, because front headlock chokes really does help if you've got nice long arms. So the two big ones are the Darst and the Anaconda. Really more the Darst than the Anaconda is popular. But the guillotine is, of course, always an option. Arm-in guillotine, if they're reaching for you. Arm-out guillotine if you get the chance. The arm-out guillotine obviously being one of the strongest chokes in MMA, or in anything. But if you're a little stumpy guy, if you're just a little guy, if you're just a small bean, it's very hard to get to punch through full anacondas and things like that on someone longer and taller than you. So what you did see Henry Cejudo doing was going to the quarter Nelson, which is that one hand behind the head, the other hand wrapped under the armpit and onto the back of your own wrist, which is a really good position. And you can threaten to turn people over from there. You can run around to the side and start kneeing the body sometimes. He really did wear on Sterling a bit with that, but the commentators were going, and Sterling's got a neck injury and this very smart, but it doesn't really accomplish a lot if you can't turn him over and you can't threaten a choke. I thought the clinch work in this fight was really fun. Sterling's takedowns all came from the clinch along the fence, because that is, as we always say, doesn't matter if you're an Olympian in wrestling, it's not wall wrestling. Wall wrestling is only MMA. There is no World Wall Wrestling Championship out there. The World Wall Wrestling Championship is MMA. But Sterling did really well getting takedowns along the fence. There was some beautiful work in this one. Both guys going one way, coming back the other, exploiting the guy's changed balance, successfully defending himself and then coming back the other way. I really liked how Henry was entering on legs out in the open. Like, he'd duck in on a shot with his head to the outside, come up on the clinch, grab the body lock, and then look for his trips. Or when Aljo threw his hips back, Henry would look to snap him down or hit him with the knee. It was beautiful chain wrestling. Dude's been doing this his whole life. And the inside trip that he hit in, was it the third or the fourth? Just gorgeous. You know, the inside trip that he hit Demetrius Johnson with, I think, 3 times in their second fight, having that been his only moment of success in the first fight. You know, the change in Cejudo from that first Demetrius Johnson fight to the second Demetrius Johnson fight, he became such a more complete fighter. Just, he didn't really have anything in the first DJ fight except for the takedowns. But for that to be the only thing that worked, and then for Demetrius Johnson to go away ready for that and come back and not be able to deal with it the second time around, really impressive. His inside trips are just, incredible. But he didn't hit it from the over-under this time. He hit it from the double unders, which is much less common to see. I think really this fight, you know, Cejudo is a great student of the game, and you can see that with anyone who goes to train with him and how they fight in their next fight. He's a great game planner. He understands his team's game plan. If they're giving it to him, he understands it. But the things that sort of let him down, combination work, he's very much a sort of ones and twos hitter. Couldn't really open up with body kicks that much because Aljamain Sterling is one of the best in the world at grabbing body kicks and making it matter. There's tons of great clips of him. I mean, just go Twitter and search Aljo catch or something like that, because people are always putting up clips of him catching kicks and running into takedowns off them or getting clinches off them. But when Cejudo got top position, even in the first round, he got a great trip from the body lock, just outside trip, got top position, held on to the half guard, couldn't really do anything with it. And Aljo worked his way back to butterfly, got up, you know. It was the top game that led Cejudo down at several points in this one. And yeah, the lack of a submission threat from the front headlock. And Aljo, you know, he did a lot of successful bodywork on the feet. Cejudo was landing some big shots, some good punches and things, but Aljo was putting in the volume. And I think a lot of people didn't like that the fight was scored 3-2 Aljo. And a lot of people didn't really care to look at his bodywork, but he's doing a lot of bodywork. One thing I did love having back about Henry Cejudo, really times a knee well. And times a snap down well. You don't see guys like snap downs in MMA, rare and also kind of forced. But if you looked at some of the positions Henry Cejudo got snap downs from, he did it to Marlon Moraes as well. But he'll get he'll enter on a single, he grab the body lock, he'll pretend to be tripping guy, or even try and trip the guy. The guy will throw his hips back, Henry will snap him down. There was a moment in the fifth where they were clinched up along the fence and Aljo was on the inside and Henry had his back to the fence, and with a whizzer, just as Aljo drove in, he just pushed him past and straight down into the front headlock. Front headlocks and knees, they're Henry Cejudo's big things that really impress me. The thing is that he's really good with timing knees, catching guys changing levels and or coming up. He's not great at hammering the body over and over like Demetrius Johnson. If he had that and his clinch, I think he'd be an absolute monster. I mean, he is an absolute monster, but I think he'd be an even better fighter than he is now. So I think this fight's quite interesting because we had a couple on here. Henry Cejudo went away for 3 years, came back, fought the world champion, who's coming off wins over, the win over TJ Dillashaw. Yeah, fair enough. TJ Dillashaw wasn't looking his best up to that point. He had a big layoff, didn't look great against Corey Sandhagen, got a sketchy decision win, and fought injured against Aljo in that fight. So yeah, it was all kind of like disappointing. But Aljo coming off a huge win over Piotr Jan, where he looked great. But Henry came back from 3 years off and looked every bit the part. You know, he kept up with Aljo. He lost the fight, but it was a close, competitive fight at all points. And you were just watching it going, damn, imagine if that guy had been fighting this whole time and stayed sharp. But then on the other hand, you got Kron Gracie coming back from 2 years off or whatever it was and added nothing to his game. Genuinely one of the weirdest fights, because when it was announced, I was like, oh, damn, they're paying Charles Jourdain back for all that dick sucking he's been doing on Twitter, all the defending fighter pay. One of the FaZe guys said, man, the UFC guys really deserve to be paid more. I love watching them fight, blah, blah, blah. And Charles Jourdain comes in and goes, shut your cock-sucking mouth. You don't know what you're talking about. We get paid exactly what we deserve, actually more than we deserve. The UFC deserves all the money. They're nice to give us some. And just everyone's reaction was, you didn't need to do that, Charles. Why'd you do that to him? and he doubled the fuck down. He was kind of like Jake Matthews in that regard. He was like, yeah, I'm mid, but what if I lick boot too? But then as the fight got closer, I was like, oh God, I hope he doesn't rehabilitate Kron. I hope he doesn't just easily get taken down and submitted. Because Kron, aura, well, not the aura, just the level of bollocks around this guy. Great talent, amazing guy, amazing grappler rather. But because of his dad, people get redacted about him. Just the obsession with him being like some kind of mystic. They're going like, oh, he doesn't even use modern guards. He only uses the closed guard and the feet on the hips. And then you watch a match of his and he immediately ends up in reverse De La Riva. No, he plays the guards he's given and then he improves position like anyone else. He's got a great guillotine, yeah, but if you look at that year at ADCC, it's not necessarily the best year. He wins the year that Marcelo retires because he had a match with Marcelo in the finals the time before and just got so frustrated that he's like eye-gouging Marcelo Garcia, the nicest man in jiu-jitsu. And he did, in fact, get guillotined by Marcelo. But it was the first ADCC without Marcelo. Leo Vieira was there and old as hell. JT Torres hadn't really become as great as he is. And then I think the guy he met in the final was Otavio Souza, who, you know, haven't heard much about him in a while. So it wasn't a super strong field. What he did was impressive, but this idea that he left grappling when he could have dominated there for years to come to MMA, probably not true. But really, I want to contrast this with Diego Lopez versus Evloev, because Diego Lopez is not Kron Gracie. He's not got all those accolades in no-gi grappling. He's not submitted as many great guys as Kron Gracie has. He's not even been within a day's march of as many great grapplers as Kron Gracie has. But what he did have was an effective guard for MMA, whereas Kron Gracie kept jumping guard and absolutely failing. And I think part of this is that the guard jump disarms you completely from the get-go. Because you're putting yourself in a position you're losing. If you stay there and nothing happens, nothing else, say that both of you just lay there, and for some reason the ref doesn't break you, you've lost the round because he was on top, and that's what all that's going to matter. You have to do a ton of striking from the bottom to even be considered by the judges to be ahead. But if you strike from the bottom, you can make a difference. You can actually do some stuff. But we'll talk about that in a second. But you've disarmed yourself because half the effectiveness of good guard players in MMA is that the other guy is trying to keep them down. Charles Jourdain was laying on top, keeping his arms tight, waiting to get up. You consider good submissions of good fighters. Ricardo Lamas versus Charles Oliveira. Submits him because he rolls him over the top into a guillotine while Charles Oliveira is desperately trying to keep him down. You watch anyone who's really good from the guard in MMA and actually attacking people, it's because they're threatening to get up all the time. Or they're throwing tons of elbows. Ideally, both. But a lot of guys do what Brian Battle did against that Russian he fought, which is they get in there on the bottom and they just keep trying to throw up triangles and they're like, damn, this works in the gym or whatever. And they don't have any success and they lose. But if they've been throwing some fucking elbows the entire time, they might have had some success. They might have made the guy move. If you watch Diego Lopez, not only is Evloev trying to keep him down, which is important, but he immediately goes K-control, grabs underneath the thigh on one side, which is, it's a trade-off. Because if you put your hand underneath someone's leg and then it gets and they sit down on that leg, your arm's trapped there. You've got to be fine with it being trapped there, but you have to know that the punches are going to be able to come in on the same side. So what people do is they pull themselves onto their side, normally put a knee in, or start penduluming their legs. But we've been talking about this for years. Neil Melanson was talking about it because Caro Parisian did it against GSP, which is why it was called K-control. It then became a big thing with leg lockers, like Lachlan Giles and so on, because you can invert on the legs. Rafael Lovato used it against Musasi when he was gassed out of his arse. You can invert, you can come back on triangles and so on. But one of the great things about it is that you anchor yourself to that leg so they can't just stand up and run away or run around your guard. You get on your side, you put your knee in front of their chest so they can't come down on you too easily, and then you can go between holding their wrist, the one that can hit you, holding their wrist, or hammer fisting them by drawing your hand back over your head and throwing as hard as you can. And you actually got some decent stank on that. If they try and get in real close, you can throw it as an elbow. But you saw Lopez doing this. He's throwing hammer fists and Evloev's hands are coming into the middle of his chest, and then Lopez hops into a corner lock, which is where you've got your guard closed but over their shoulder. And then you're just a little jump from an armbar. And Evloev sat there being like, I think I'm okay. And then Lopez threw his leg over and almost ripped his arm off. Good defense by Evloev. He got his knee in. I mean, it's kind of like when you're defending knee bars and anything else like that. If you can wedge your other knee in and under their butt and create some slip there so that they go down over the joint, you can save yourself. But yeah, Kron was at a disadvantage to start with because he jumps guard, and then all Jourdain has to do is keep his elbows tight and get up, particularly because Kron's not throwing elbows. He's not trying to slice him open and he's not hurting him. You can hurt people with elbows from your back. Watch anyone who's good at it, like Ortega against Tavares was a great one. Oliveira's good at it. Michael Bisping versus GSP. Slices him open with an elbow from the bottom by framing on him and then dropping his elbow. Actually, there was a great example. Who was it? Oh, it was Kai Asakura. I'm only going to touch on this because I'm going to write an article about this fight. But Kai Asakura in Rising 42 main event against Yuki Matoya. He does exactly what Michael Bisping's always preaching and always done, which is a great way of playing the guard. Like, Matoya takes him down, he's in guard. He puts both hands on his neck, possibly thumbs in the sternal notch, which is always a good one. Bas Rutten did that to Kevin Randleman, just put his thumbs down inside his throat. But pushed his head away, got on his side, put one hand down, got up. Push the head away, shrink the hips out, get up. But if you're doing that, the guy will push back into you and you let your hands go and you let him drop onto an elbow like Michael Bisping did against GSP. There are loads of ways to strike and to threaten to get up off the bottom, but none of those was what Kron Gracie was doing. He was there trying to dig out a control like it's a pure no-gi match. But the guy's not going to get called for stalling and you're losing. Add to that, his takedown attempts were to just try and put his guard up and walk his way into the clinch. And it worked. He got his clinches, but he got bad clinch position. He's throwing his arm over the guy like a headlock. And Charles Jourdain, again, he's a black belt in his own right. He's good enough at keeping his elbows in on the ground to not get submitted if you're not threatening him. And he wall wrestles every day and has done for years and years and years. If you stand there with crap controls and don't do anything, he's going to throw you past him or circle out, you know? Really bizarre, especially because Damian Maia was in Kron Gracie's corner. And Damian Maia made the exact same discovery that Kron did. You got to get takedowns. And Damian Maia helped along the jiu-jitsu world by focusing on MMA and learning wrestling, because now the jiu-jitsu world knows that a lot of the time the best sweep or best guard play is to just sit up on a single leg and try and wrestle. And Damian Maia basically invented that. But yeah, Damian Maia's in his corner going, you've got to get the takedown, blah, blah, blah. And you're going, yeah, it's not great that you've got Damian Maia in your corner, and he must have spent months telling you that you've got to get some takedowns, and you're still not doing it. And it's just crazy. Like, he landed when he jabbed. It's just that he threw half as many strikes as Jourdain. And every time Jourdain threw his strikes, Kron just covered up. And you're going, this guy used to train with the Diaz's. Imagine what a heavy bag he would be at the Diaz's. If you cover up and just let Charles Jourdain rip to the body and head and look like Julio Cesar Chavez. If you're making Charles Jourdain throw combinations like Nick Diaz, imagine what Nick Diaz does against you. I think, you know, because they were touting him for a long time as like the future. They're going, oh, he trains with us and he's great. I think there was a Kirill situation there. I think he went there and beat them up on the ground, and then when they sparred with him on the feet, they just beat him up and he didn't really learn anything from it. But yeah, I mean, Kron, respect to him for getting back in there after the Club Swanson fight. He's in a difficult situation because of his dad's reputation and so on, and his name. People expect him to be able to do that. And the truth is that, like, now everyone knows how to fight. When Rickson was fighting in MMA, I mean, when Rickson was fighting in Vale Tudo, nobody knew how to fight. The one good fighter Rickson fought, well, the two good fighters Rickson fought, Yuki Nakai, who was tiny and had just been blinded in one eye earlier that evening, and Masakatsu Funaki, who was all right, important to like the landscape of MMA and the history of MMA, but not amazing on the ground or on the feet. And, you know, that fight against Funaki happened 3 weeks after all the best fighters in the world fought in the Pride Grand Prix. Rickson could have fought Sakuraba, Igor Vovchanchin, Mark Coleman, Mark Kerr, Guy Mezger, but he didn't want to. Now, granted, he has his own reasons. He got a ton of money to do that fight. His son, you know, one of his other sons tragically died. But yeah, Rickson fought a lot of guys who didn't really know how to fight or didn't really know what he did. And now everyone knows what Kron does. And they've all got wall wrestling and shit too. But like I said, I respect to him for coming back from that Swanson fight where things were so obviously disastrously wrong. I hope he can get some more fights in. That's the thing. Like, if he fights once every year or once every 2 years, he won't make the improvements, probably. If he fights more regularly and against worse competition, maybe he loses again and they bounce him from the UFC, but he's always got a bit of name value. And God knows they need that in this era of, like, just constant Contender Series shit. So what else do I want to talk about from this UFC card? Parker Porter. Yeah, I do, actually. Parker Porter is paywalled content. We'll talk about that on the Boycast. Made $4 million for this fight, by the way. We done Evloev versus Lopez. The Kimura shit in that fight was also really cool. Evloev, you saw what makes him really good. His jab, his double jab, his feints into jabs. That's all really good. His entries on takedowns I really liked. He went in on a single leg with his head outside. Shout out to Craig Jones, who included me talking about that with Aljamain Sterling in his pre-fight breakdown. Evloev ended with a single with his head on the outside, which is a great way to stop yourself from getting kneed or uppercutted. Great thing to do against someone who's like a last-minute replacement, who you don't know how explosive they are, how powerful, how good their eye and timing is. So he did that, and then he immediately ran forward, off-balancing Lopez, put his head in the middle, and started trying to finish the double along the fence. It was really nice. Evloev's really good. He's like Ismagulov. He's one of those guys who is on an incredible streak. He's beating everyone. No one wants to fight him, except Diego Lopez, respect. But he will never finish a fucking fight. Which I suppose brings us on to Bilal Muhammad. But, this one, I'll get it out there. I thought Bilal Muhammad did a great job sticking to the game plan, pounding Gilbert Burns' other arm, throwing in the body kicks when he could land him. His 1-2s looked good. His stance switches really did seem to bother Gilbert Burns. But Gilbert Burns didn't do anything. Now, I've always had suspicions over Gilbert Burns' gas tank, particularly because of things like the Kamaru fight, where he's so explosive in round 1, and then the moment round 2 rolls round, he's not half the fighter because so much of his game is just being explosive. Doesn't have that economy of motion in the striking and so on. But he really didn't do anything here. So there was big suspicions over the injury. God knows why this was 5 rounds. I would love for... I've always said I'd like 5 rounds between top 10 fighters. But I'd love for eliminators for title fights. Firstly, for them to decide which ones are, which is going to be rare because they don't like getting locked into that, the UFC. They like being able to hold the title shot under the nose of anyone they want to quickly sign a bout for. But I'd like all title eliminators to be 5 rounds, is what I'd think. But this was not the one to start with. It was just dull, Bilal did what he was supposed to, but at some point you've got to realise that the other guy isn't throwing back and trying to step it up and get a finish. But, what can you say? He went out there, he got the W. Hopefully he gets a title shot. There's obviously more deserving than Colby Covington. I don't think I need to say that. No matter how unimpressive the performances can be, he is still on a great run. Starting with my boy Curtis Millender back in the day. Jesus. Right, loads still to talk about. I didn't even talk about Ryzen. I'm going to write something about that Kai Asakura fight because I really liked it. The ring cutting, the combinations, the weaves, the cage wrestling in the ring, the thing that people who love JMMA claim the ring prevents. Huge part of this fight, huge part of every fight between good fighters in Japan, basically. But we'll get into all that in the article. I might make it available to everyone because I just want to write it. But I'll be back on the Boycast on Wednesday, Thursday. We'll talk about some of the other stuff that I love from this. Shout out Jian Jianan because she actually looked really sharp. I have always thought she's not very good, but she looked sharp in this fight. It wasn't just that Jessica Andrade bum rushed her because Jessica Andrade does that to everyone. Losing my voice now. Obviously, we've got to talk about Kennedy Nzechukwu winning another fight. Fucking amazing, isn't he, on like a 4-fight winning streak? But yeah, I'll be back midweek. If you want to get in on that episode and support the podcast and get all the other stuff and be cool, become a Patreon boy. If you want to send an email to the podcast, jackslackpodcast@gmail.com. And if you want to see what I'm writing anytime, fireprimer.com. I am your boy, Jack Slack, gearing up to moan about that dude on the Rising card who jumped guard in every round of the fight and lost every round after jumping guard. Bless.